with machine stitching, hand embroidery, paint, transferred images, found objects, and graphite drawings. Her figures are drawn on canvas with graphite pencils and come from live models and photographs based on family members or people of personal importance, transforming them into ancestors that tell stories from another time. It has always been important to Smith to carry on the quilting tradition of her ancestors while balancing the complexities of a world that is insistent on telling their story for her. Smith's body of work focuses on the concept of duality, and I really love this. The coexistence of freedom and restraint. Smith sees this as a dichotomy of mental freedom to create as she pleases, but also a spiritual restraint that dictates that she uphold and honor her Southern roots. I would like to read Beverly's artist statement because her evocative words, as well as her artistry, are the threads that give her pieces life. Beverly's statement is, I choose to express myself through quilts because of its personal connection to my ancestors and Southern roots. When I visited my grandmother in South Carolina, I always felt safe under her hand-sewn quilts, which took on a rhythmic pattern similar to kente cloth with vertical stripes, bright colors, and asymmetrical improvisation. A simple piece of fabric can hold family truths from generations back. I really like that thought. A simple piece of fabric can hold family truths from generations back. My grandmother's quilts consisted of leftover scraps from my aunt's worn-out dresses, my uncle's ripped jeans, and faded floral tablecloths from several Thanksgiving dinners. Conversations with my 98-year-old mother, grandmother, and aunts have always inspired me to base my artworks on the antebellum South, expressions and idioms, as well as past taboo and controversial issues. Roni Nicole Henderson is a Columbia-based filmmaker and visual artist who makes fiction, experimental, fine art, and documentary films and video installations. As a photographer, she shoots fashion and fine art and documents artists and everyday folk. Her films, produced through her company, One Day Films, have been featured in Black Star, Crown Heights, and Pan-African film festivals. She received her MFA in film from the Savannah College of Art and Design and a BA in English from Clark Atlanta University. Henderson states, the One Day Films LLC has grown from my desire to literally move about the world, capture its miracles, and project them onto the collective memory. Her films Grace and Breakthrough stay with me still. She is also director of one of my favorite videos, Air Conditioning, by artist filmmaker. Both Smith and Henderson explore family, ancestral influences, and the contemporary experiences of Black people in America in their work. And I am pleased to welcome both of them, friends, to the Sumter County Gallery of Art.
Well, thank you so much for that.
Oh.
And that's it. Nicole, I want to thank you as well for coming up and picking up the artwork and inviting me to Sumter, to the gallery.
Can I say one?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I would be negligent in thanking our sponsors,
Yes.
Ben Griffith and Tammy Finney of State Farm Insurance, and Representative J. David Weeks and the Weeks Law Firm, and the Sumter County Cultural Commission.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. I thank them
For making this possible.
Thank you.
Yes. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to Sumter. Beautiful, beautiful town. I've been riding around, loving the neighborhood. And just something just keeps running through me as I travel, not so much up and down Broad Street, but going into the different neighborhoods. It's absolutely beautiful. And thank you, Roni, for offering to do this interview.
I'm so astonished. I wonder, between the two of you, whose idea was it to connect us?
Yeah, well, I think actually it was Karen's, really. I think
Really?
Okay.
she saw the connections between both of your
I was
works.
gonna say, once we got on the phone, I mean, you know, from her being a teacher, she's like, sticking there, girl, it's gonna be, just all these connections, in terms of the inspiration for the book. So I'd love to start there, if you'd like, in terms of you coming into this, tradition of quilting.
Right.
This communication effect. What kind of rings to me is this idea of the practical, utilitarian, right, aspect of quilts. They keep us warm literally, but they also hold so much.
Yes.
Talk to me about learning at the grandmother, learning the craft of
Right.
quilting.
Well, I was first introduced to quilts through my grandmother. And I was the kind of child that never liked being away from home. My family reminded me constantly of that. But when I would go to my grandmother's house in Blacksburg, and I would be in that little room right off the kitchen, and she would cover me with those patchwork quilts, I never became homesick. It was very special for me. I remember the bright colors, but I never really understood until later that I was being covered with my aunt's discarded dresses and my uncle's ripped jeans and tablecloths that we used for Thanksgiving long ago. And so my grandmother, from her, I learned that a piece of fabric can hold generations of truths. And it was when I was at UNCC in college, when I took a textile class, and I began to make a quilt, my first quilt. And I didn't think much of it, but one of my professors entered it into a contest, and it was for all UNC students from all over. And I won first place. And I kept going from there because I realized, wow, I can tell my stories through quilts. And it took me right back to my first encounter with my grandmother's quilt. So that became my connection. But I have to say that it is really the symbolic dimensions of the quilt as an African-American artist and the implied spirituality connection to the seen and the unseen that is really important to me about quilting. It's a special spirituality.
I feel that. I mean, I sat here and I was like, a part of me wanted to kind of bow in reverence because I understand, I feel it beyond words in a way. And that kind of takes me to the aspect of the masquerade. You also make sculpture. And so in a lot of African traditional religions, that fabric from those who have passed on is a symbol, right, into these beautiful, I don't want to say costumes, but wonderful, sculpture really. And they dance the masquerade to evoke the energy of those who have gone before us. And so that link in how it's still here, we've kept that retention, right? And I also love, like I said, that the idea that we would, it's not just something you put on once a year to remember, but it is also literally keeping us warm.
Right.
And there's preciousness in it, and at the same time, It's not, you know, the warmness kind of shows the love. I'd like to talk to you about you and the continuum of brilliant portrait artists. Can you talk to me about why, or I hate to say why, talk to me about the importance of elevating them in this way in portraits, having the Black figure in the scale on the quilts.
Well, first, I got started doing portraits in my quilts and using the graphite when I was in graduate school at Winthrop University in Rock Hill. And I had to complete a drawing 5 class to meet the requirement, and one was not available. So I was placed in an advanced MMA painting class. And part of the studio is that we receive yards of canvas. And so I'm like, okay, now how am I gonna meet my drawing requirement and utilize all of this canvas? And that's when I started experimenting with paint and graphite, the mixed media, into my quilts. And I would draw these huge images on the canvas. And then I found that the canvas was very flexible. I could sew on it, I could paint on it, I could use a lot of various media on top of it. And that's how I got started with the graphite images in my work. I also use a lot of vintage photographs, live models to complete my images. And that's when my ancestors started coming through. My sister Carolyn, she is my muse, and I would use her to do my uppity. And I start drawing my character using my graphite pencils, real soft pencils, 8-4s, because they just blend into the canvas. And then I'd spray it down, add more graphite to it. And it would start out with a particular person that I'm emulating, and then it would transfer itself, it seems, to a relative, someone I've never met before. But I would keep going, and it would transform itself until it would be like, okay, I'm here. I can't tell you, but I know how to stop. But it's an inner experience with the pencil and the canvas, and I know when to stop. But in between that process is doing a lot of spraying and coming back in and graphiting, and then drawing some more. And I started to meet these relatives that I've never met before.
Really interesting, wow.
Yeah.
And channeling
Yes.
makes me think about, I know sometimes it's frowned upon, the idea of automatic writing, but this idea of something saying, hey, keep going, I'm in here. Of sculpture, really.
Right.
You know, this idea of dipping into it to find out who that is who wants to speak. Does that feed into then the messages that are in your work, the text that you use?
Yes.
Are they messages from this energy to us, from us to them? Can you talk to me about that incorporation of text then in terms of
Yes. So some of it is part of the research, but the person that comes from the quilt, it will dictate the time period. And then the time period, from the time period, it will dictate what took place during that time, a historical reference. It will dictate a place, and it will also dictate the fabric that I'm using. Now, I really love the patchwork. When you look at my quilts, you'll notice I use a lot of patchwork because that is what I remember from my grandmother, but it also has a lot of African characteristics. A book I read by Robert Ferris, skips my mind. You know what
I do.
Flash of the Spirit.
Flash of the Spirit, yes.
Flash of the Spirit,
Flash of
one
the
of my
Spirit, thank you,
favorites.
Cole.
Yes, thank you. But the author talks about how in Africa, they would use, like in the kente cloth, the offbeat phrasing, that's how he referred to the patchwork. And how it's like, almost like jazz music, how you have this staggered rhythm. But when I have conversations with my relatives, and they talk about the patchwork and making sure things don't line up, is to keep spirits from coming inside of the fabric. And so I'm like, okay, spirits can hide in fabric. Fabric can hold spirits. But even beyond that, when I go beyond Ferris African connection and my grandparents and my aunts' explanation for the staggered patterns, the fabric itself, yes, it can dictate what's happening in the story that's taking place with the text, as well as with the portrait. Many of my fabrics are very vintage. They may go back to the 1940s, the 1930s during the Depression. So all of that correlates and it tells the story. I think I answered your question.
Oh, man, you blew my mind too. With the staggered patterns, so the spirits can.
Yes, so spirits can't hide in the fabric.
Interesting.
I can't imagine where that may have come from. All I know is that I am very attracted to the patchwork and the offbeat phrasing. And I try to make sure I put that in my quilt, just to be on the safe side.
So Beverly, are you saying that the lining up of the patchwork is to prevent spirits from inhabiting
Yes.
the piece?
Yes.
But,
No, you avoid the lineup. You don't line it up, correct? You have to
Don't
stagger.
line it up.
You have to stagger.
So, yeah, it's
so
a
you're trying to
staggered-
prevent something that you're also courting?
I'm sorry.
So that prevents, but it sounds like the spirits in your pieces are very important. So,
She said so they can't hide.
Yes, so they
oh,
can't
that's
hide.
very
And
different.
usually, I think
Don't
it's
want
safe.
hidden
Yeah,
spirits.
and so, and usually I should have said negative spirits. So they can't hide inside of your family. So it confuses them when you have that pattern that meanders and move in and out.
That's really beautiful because it is, it's a form of resistance.
Yeah.
It's a counter narrative
Yeah.
to order.
Yes.
I can remember my older daughter, a brilliant child. We found this school, we moved to a neighborhood, so we get to this particular school. It was nationally renowned as Atlanta. And I didn't know this at first, but the kids had to walk down the hall like this. And so my daughter, she's a brilliant dancer. And so she would pirouette and not fall out of line. And the teacher, I mean, she was just utterly frustrated with this. And she would say, but she spins. I mean, she doesn't disturb anybody, hit anybody, but she spins. And inside, I was like, I'm so thankful that you are breaking in your own way, resistant, right? What we're told is orderly, is actually allows the spirits, many spirits to hide in our world.
Yeah.
So that's interesting
Yes.
because now my mind is going about jazz
Yeah.
and the idea that
All of the
even in our
places.
rhythms,
Yeah,
even in our rhythm, we're resistant,
right,
right? What the dominant narrative says is order.
right.
Beautiful, Beverly, wow. Okay, I want to talk about the red shoes.
Yeah.
So, obviously they occur in your work, they feel like power and grace and, you know, of course, like home. Where did the red shoes come for you?
Yeah.
And can you talk to us about what it is?
Yes. Well, you know, I do a lot of research on my ancestors. And my grandma Cassie, that was born in 1790, I found ledgers of her shopping at a store, the McGill store, which is in York County, South Carolina. 1830. We're in the heart of enslaved individuals. But my grandma Cassie is a free African American at that time. And she's purchasing these red shoes. And it blew my mind. And she's also purchasing spelling books. And she's also purchasing like a 2-ounce container of what they call madder. Never heard of it, but it's like a red dye that comes from insects and some other kind of mixture. And I'm like, Granny, red shoes, a 2-ounce of madder, you can't dye anything with that, that's red. So I'm thinking she's dressing up, putting on lipstick. And I never imagined that kind of freedom from one of my ancestors during that time. But all of my characters in my quilts, they have on red shoes. It symbolizes for me not only honoring my grandmother Cassie, but a bit of boldness, independence, and like in the case of my uppity, a little scandalous.
You're a little scandal.
And I know that you use red shoes in your
I do. Red is a thing that red is my homage to Toni Morrison. It's my bit of coming of age and the Sula story that I kind of will place in different places. But the red shoes in my last film, that's how I was blown away. Like, wow, I know what I was thinking when I chose the red shoes.
Yeah.
But even to hear that story about your grandmother is so inspiring. And again, there's resistance in all of it.
Yeah.
And that's a long time
Going in the
ago.
spring, right?
Yeah, you don't hear that.
No, you don't hear that.
And I'm even wondering, what was people's reaction to this woman in red, this free woman in red shoes,
Yes.
to be applying the law? Maybe we should write
During
a
that,
film
during
for
that
this.
time. Yes.
I would love to understand, you know, and to know, kind of what
But
that.
it gave me a glimpse, a little bit of her personality. Yeah. So I see that in myself, I see that in my siblings, my other family members. And again, how, you know, it's just being passed on. So my quotes are here to like tell the story, but I'm still learning myself. Everywhere I go, it's like my quilts are becoming like a magic carpet, as we discussed before. I keep finding out more about my ancestors. It's like they're ahead of my quilts. And that's the joy of when I create them and then I come out and I meet all of you. That's the best part of it because I start discovering a little more of myself and a little more of my ancestry.
Thank you for sharing them. Their story is so powerful. Can you talk to us about how she emerged and
Yeah.
how she brings?
Yes, you know, according to Webster, uppity is self-absorbed, overconfident, unlawful, disrespectful. When I started reading those definitions, I'm like, that was so foreign to me. Because uppity is someone that I grew up with that, you know, she goes beyond all of those stereotypes. She is royalty. She is, she makes her own rules. She is confident in a way that is so deep down. And as I kept pondering those definitions from Webster, it's totally opposite of what I knew of an uppity growing up. I thought about the African woman that came over on the slave ship and how many of them came from royalty. And just because they were placed in burlap clothing and stripped of their royal garments did not mean that you could strip the dignity inside of them. But it was very disturbing and irritating for the master and the people trying to define her. And so therefore, the only thing that they could do was label her uppity to try to bring her down and put her into a certain category. And it's just not happening with my uppitys. Also, I always love the Aunt Jemima character. I love so many things about my Southern roots, but I love the Aunt Jemima character. Although my uppity does not always portray that low genre of Aunt Jemima, you know, with the rag on the head and the big smile. But it still has some characteristics I like to play on. This particular uppity is featuring the black of the berry, the sweet of the juice. And if any of you ever picked blackberries off the vine, you know the ripe berry is very sweet. But this also has a double connotation in that the black of the berry has to do with skin tone. And a lot of prejudice that we have in our culture in America that has to do a lot with the color of your skin. So that's what this uppity is about. Of course, I always like to use the rough, and that's going back to that innate royal persona that is in the character. And again, I have the patchwork, some vintage patchwork in there, and that pie, it reads at the top, you don't want, what did I say? You don't want none of this pie. It's the same as people say. So I do several of these, but they all have a different message. And they help me to take back my own definition of who I am as a Black woman, who my sister, my relatives, my friends are as Black women in America.
I mean, the pattern in this one is so beautiful. I love the juxtaposition, you know, against the layout in the back, you know, to her curves, and these beautiful shapes on her, and then these blackberries. I just, it's the energy of this.
Yes,
You know, I mean, there's so much in that gesture.
yes,
You know what I
yes,
mean?
that one hand gesture, right? Just like when you talk about how they were walking in the classroom folded, okay? Those have meanings, and they come from Africa. A lot of the stance we would have in Africa. Flash of the Spirit talks about a lot of those gestures. With the hand out, with the one hand on the hip, what that means, even though we might recognize it in our grandmothers with the hand on the hip. I mean business, a lot of that comes from Africa. And the Ife holding out the hand, the power that the cheerleaders use now when they get ready to cheer. I was a cheerleader, so. I used to make that sense, baby, okay, right? Coming right from that Yoruba culture. But yes, that hand right there, that one little gesture. And also the stance with the foot out. But berries have been coming to me lately. I'm a person, I love to pick fresh fruit. My favorite is a plum tree. And I've never heard of a plum thinking until I started researching, because when I was coming up, plums were dying out. So it was always a plum patch that we would look for. And I saw some great palm patches on my way to Sumter, which is too early for them, but I would stop if they were on that and start picking them. But my quilt that's here with the young ladies and that quilt pattern, the bear's claw, during the Underground Railroad, when slaves were escaping to the north, that bear's paw pattern is said was a part of quilts hung out for everybody to see. But that pattern lets you know that if you take that path where the bear claw is, you can find berries that they used to eat that are safe for you. And that's what, you know, could be your nourishment as you headed toward the north. So I started adding a lot of those quilt patterns. I have time now, while I'm not teaching, to be able to recreate a lot of those patterns. So I have them on that quilt, and I have them also on the quilt that's outside this gray wall here. A rite of passage. That's a series of quilts I've been working on since the COVID-19. I'm kind of getting away from your story, but.
Well, no, I think it's interesting that those two with the bear's claw are pictured with children.
Yes,
And what you're projecting or saying to them
Right.
by there's nourishment this way.
yes,
Right,
absolutely,
and you know, and also that there's safety this way,
absolutely.
you know.
And so when everything closed down, March the 13th was my last day of school last year. And that's the last time I saw my students. I remember taking pictures of what I had on the board, so I could remember, because they're gonna come back that Monday and have a slide test. And I never saw them again. We went on Zoom right after that. A lot of my students did not show up for Zoom, and that was devastating for me. I don't know if other people can really understand how teachers felt to go from the classroom, seeing your students in person, and then suddenly you're on Zoom and they're not showing up. Okay, so I had to like really deal with that mentally and emotionally. But I started creating these quotes that had to do with simple ceremonies that we sometimes take for granted. My students did not get to have their graduation, they did not get to go to prom. I did not get to have my retirement celebration with my other colleagues. And so simple things like learning to tie your shoe, which is what that rite of passage is outside of there. But I started recreating the patterns that were a part of quilts during the Underground Railroad as a guide for slaves when they were escaping. Another book of mine that I love, Hidden in Plain View by Tubin. Tubin would interview quilters in the Charleston Market, the historic district, and they would talk about how their ancestors told them how they would sew these patterns into the quilt and hang them out, but everybody would not know what they meant. Now, when you talk to quilt historians, they will tell you that there's not enough evidence to say that this really occurred. But I am one of those that I'm like, how could it not? I mean, we were singing songs to help us escape.
Braiding hair to help.
Braiding
escape.
hair with, you know, secrets in them. And I've always been intrigued about textiles, crocheting, knitting. Women used to hide secret codes in these forms of fiber and textile artworks all along throughout history. But because it was what was considered woman's work, they were kind of like overlooked. But that escape was, it had to be planned. It wasn't for everyone. The elderly could not take that path. And the very young sometimes could not take that path. And even those of us who could walk and have the stamina, they knew you had to have your nutrition built up, your spirituality built up. So each time a quilt would lay out and kind of lead you to that preparation. So the quilts, a rite of passage with the bear's claw, that particular quilt, a shoe fly, all of those were secret codes to help you be able to prepare and to make that travel. But for me, I have not called on my ancestors so much since we have been going through COVID-19 and being separated from each other. How I am reminded of those little things that kept us together, that how we are all one. And that's the reflection that are in those particular quilts.
It's beautiful because, I mean, you know, one might argue we've come a long way, but it still seems we need paths to safety. You know, I hear a lot of people talk about the way to avoid, you know, the perils, right, that we face. Sometimes we're out and about, just living. And so I feel that that's really beautiful that you're offering that. And in a way, you know, all of these meditations are needed, right? Just the creation of them puts that into the air. I think about it as not just a guide, but also protection.
Yes.
And again, you can't get away from the fact that it is something that literally you pass down in a family. It is the warmth, they are the warmest blankets in the house.
Yeah.
You know, I think about my husband, his grandmother's quilt, and he's like, don't let it touch the quilt. You know, he has this energy about it because it's precious.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think about my grandmother and her quilting and how those quilts made it through so many, you know, different families passing down. You know, my grandparents raised me, so this idea that when my mother and father would get themselves together and we would get a place, you know, they would send quilts, you know, and just how that keeps you with a sense of home.
Right.
Even though you're not, you know, in one place.
Yes.
So.
So the whole process and the layering is also a connection as well and holds a lot of symbolism. The clothing that I use on the quilts a lot of times are things that have been passed down and how my grandmother would use clothing. But it's symbolic too, like to cover up wear and tear, sometimes hurt, and it's also to protect. My process is traditional in a way in that I have the 3 layers, the top, the middle with the batting, and then the backing of the quilt. But sometimes I like to hide different things in the middle of the quilt. Like how my grandmother would use all kinds of old things in the middle of her quilt because she didn't always have the batting. But I may use old patterns from simplicity that my mother would use to make my play clothes, old garments that are very dear to me. Sometimes I incorporate those inside of my batting as well. So it's that layering, protection, and holding on to a little bit of those secrets.
That's what I was gonna say, it goes back to that idea of the unseen.
Yes.
Right, is that we don't see the middle.
Right.
So we don't see what's making it fluff or, you know, but it's there.
Yeah.
And it's been placed with intention,
Yes.
and that intention holds power,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And it's kind of this communication with the future in a way. Because all of it is that prayer that will make it.
Right.
You know, the durability of it is that there'll be someone around to appreciate it.
Right.
Beautiful, simplicity, God, you're taking me back. I'm just remembering a lot of things that I wasn't patient with. you know, in terms of learning it, but really wishing that I had dived in deeper into what she was into at that time. I'd like to see if there are any questions in the audience. What do you think? Is that?
Sure, I actually, I'm gonna jump in with one. I love what you were saying, both of you, the conversation about them being sort of layered, not just literally, but metaphorically as well. Having handled and installed these works, I can tell you they're heavy, but it feels like that gravity, again, is also very metaphorical in the quilts as well. But also, I love that there's so much information on the backs of them. I feel like I really got a special experience being able to handle these and install them. And so I could see the poems, especially back on this one, or I love turning this one over where it just says, I love you. I mean, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's a whole nother experience when you're hanging the quilts. Because some of them are heavy.
Yes.
And a lot of that comes from that batting I'm using and the different things I'm adding and the different types of fabrics that are there. A lot of vintage and the different stitches. I do a lot of machine stitches, but I do some hand if it's required. But I knew this quilt was going to be a mama jama for you to handle.
Yes.
You look at you.
Oh, thank you. The embroidery, everything is so beautiful.
Wow, the messages on the back. That wow. It reminds me of my husband's work. He'll often start a piece with words that will be covered in the process of painting, right? And it's about that intention.
Yeah.
So is that a post idea, or does it come after the figure? When does your idea for what kind of unseen words will be on the back? And when does that emerge for you?
It depends on the quilt. Sometimes I can be in the middle of sketching. Maybe not even the front top quilt being completed, and the message will come out in the back. I feel free when I get to the back of the quilt, and I can add what I want to the back, because that is between myself and my curator, and then or the person that may purchase the quilt. But it comes in different stages.
Beautiful. Before we take another question, can you talk to me? I love the contrast of this piece. Can you talk to us about
Piece
this
here
piece?
with the vintage morning cap on.
Yes.
Yes, you know, a lot of people ask me about my process. And I have to tell you that my process can start way before I start in the studio or on the sewing machine. I can go to a flea market and attic sale and start getting ideas. And when I found that morning cap, I knew I had to have it. My mother at the time may have been 97, but I knew that, and I started sketching her out in her favorite chair that she would always sit in, which we call the throne. And she passed away in August at 99. And now it comes to me what that quilt really meant. How I purposely have nothing but the stitches of flowers that you can see. And aging gracefully. But the quilt means so much more to me. Now, once my mother has passed away and I went through taking care of an elderly person and actually having them, being with them as they pass away in their bed, totally different meaning now than it did when I actually completed the quilt before she passed away.
Wow, Beverly. I was with my grandmother when she passed. I left LA to take care of her.
Yes,
That process is it's weighty.
yeah,
I wouldn't trade it, right?
I
Because
know.
when it's done,
It is a blessing.
it's a real
But
blessing.
I never knew that it was a blessing. It was something that I didn't want to experience. It even made me feel differently about when it's time for me to pass away, okay? It's very, it was like my mother was just holding on. We went through 3 days of her being in her bed, sleeping, and that was never her. She was up and about all the time, sitting on her throne and dictating from that throne. And so when she took to the bed for those 3 days, I was like, oh, where are the ancestors that come to get you, to show you the way? Why are you still like holding on? And then she finally went to sleep, but to go through that process with her, it was quite amazing. It made me not feel afraid for when it's time for me to pass on. And I felt like it was a gift that I was able to be there and experience that.
You know, it's interesting that you have your mother picture in the morning cap, and I think about this idea that, you know, they say we actually leave her for the living,
Yeah,
right?
yes.
And so this idea of her with the morning cap, maybe just thinking about her children
Yes.
and not being there, you know?
Yeah.
And even at 99, it's always too early.
Right, yeah, it is.
It's always too early to push a mother. And
I would
plan-
tell her, it's okay, we're fine, because I feel like that was part of the holding on. It's because of us that are staying. So, but yeah.
I love the starkness of it, the simplicity of it, and when my grandmother was in her transition, she would talk about, I need my white suit, I need my dress, I need my white dress.
Wow.
That process was really interesting. I don't know if you, I had never had an experience with hospice, but they prepare you for all these strange things that you'll see.
Yes.
And you know, you read the pamphlet, you're like, come on, you're like, how could you say how everybody is gonna,
Right.
And literally,
researched that as well.
you know,
So I
the
can
curtains,
understand.
they said they'll often reach to open a curtain above their bed. I don't know if anyone else has been with someone going to the other side, but yeah, it's quite
I heard people tell me about the one tear. And some people that were really close to their person transitioning knew to like save that tear. I saw a tear from my mother, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to think that she was maybe in pain or anything. But yeah, I've heard people say that.
Wow, are there any other questions?
Questions?
Anybody? No,
And you can ask me anything.
I'll just jump back in with some more questions. I feel like I love the book pieces. I believe it's Plant a Seed over there.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And so they've got so many different books. One of them has Jane Eyre, I think, in there. So could you talk about that decision about what
Yes.
kind of was
Well,
incorporated?
you know, I grew up with 5 sisters, and my parents would work several jobs to make sure that we had the opportunity to go to college. And so education was the big thing in my family, but also being an educator myself for 30-something years. I know the importance, and I'm still an advocate for education for everyone, especially girls. I was really inspired by the kidnapping of the girls in, I think it was Kenya. It was some years ago, maybe Nairobi, Nairobi, Kenya. And they had a recent kidnapping again, but those girls were returned back to their village, but the parents were so upset that they were like, I'm never sending my girls away again, which was such a shame. But the kidnappers, they did not want education for the girls. And so we're still kind of dealing with that attitude of equity when it comes to education for everyone. And that's kind of what that quilt is about. It has my 5 sisters. I'm included in the middle. And I have my favorite, my sister Carolyn has her favorite book, Lexambo, but we love Jane Eyre. We had planned a trip to go to her hometown, and we were just gonna read all her books and go to her little cafe, and then everything kind of shut down and turned around. But yeah, that's what inspired that quilt. Education, equity for everyone.
Interested to know from Ms. Carolyn, how does it feel to be a muse?
Sometimes good and sometimes enlarged. Do you have to have hip that big?
Yes.
Tone down the hips of this.
I have been the subject of, she has 3 uppity out, and I have been the subject of all her uppities. And then I did lose a little weight at one time, and it was, okay, you can't do this because I have got to keep you. That's my motto. But it is a journey. It is a learning journey for me to go around with Beverly to her various. She meets so many people, so many different backgrounds, and then some the same, because I'm a retired teacher also. And we meet all these educators and come together with our different views and what's been happening, to our children, our families, and our communities. And it's real. And then she will take a piece and put it in a piece of art. And it has a lot of meaning to it. And I'm learning a lot of things just by going around with her, talking to all the different people and being in all the different cities. So I am very proud of them. And we've always had a little bit of artistic talent in our among our sisters. And when she began to sew, it was a little mini version of my mother, because my mother sewed all of our clothes for in the summertime, all outfits. And so Beverly and I am next in line up from Beverly. Like she said, we have 6 children in our family. The boy is not included, but she's the baby. And but we wore a lot of clothes together that my mother would sew. So all outfits, you know how that goes. Little outfit, big fat outfit. So, but it was we were like this, and I'm her biggest critic. I can say things.
And she also threw me out of her garage. But the good thing is, I stumbled upon a new studio, and again, to talk about that spiritual connection of the quilts and how there is that connection to the seen and the unseen. The studio I have now, after she kicked me out of the garage, is in a church that when I started doing research on the church, and I found out that my great cousin from the 1800s was a minister at that church. And he passed away from a heart attack right in the pew, in the pulpit. And I heard when I was growing up that, you had a cousin that passed away right in the pulpit. Well, I was little, that didn't make much sense to me. But when I started researching the area where I was going to be, where I'm working, I'm still setting up and everything. and found out that my uncle, that I am at the church where my great cousin passed away. It's like that connection again.
I wonder who's gonna show up in these quilts.
I know.
I'd like to visit.
Yeah, it would be wonderful if you would.
Is that
So I have
Hopewell?
that sanctuary.
Is it Hopewell?
I'm sorry.
Is it Hopewell?
No, it's not Hopewell. It's in Charlotte. It's the Grace AME Zion. And it was built by former slaves. That whole area where the church is located, the first emancipated slaves came to that area in Charlotte. But eventually, due to urban renewal, they got rid of that city, that town. And only 3 buildings remain. The church and 2 other buildings connected to it. And I am in the church. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's about to be cracking.
That's
It's
what
about to be on it like we've been waiting for you. Okay.
It's winding up. But I love to go, I work like in the basement of the church, but I love to go upstairs to the sanctuary. The pews aren't there, but everything originally is there. Stained glass windows. And where the choir would sing. And it's just such a peaceful environment that I just love being there thus far. I'm just hoping I don't hear footsteps coming
No.
down while I'm working, but people tell me that they're good spirits too, so I hope it.
And you know the pattern,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
and the other ones together. You have a question? Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, Beverly, if you could, get some, communications out, they can see your blog.
Yeah.
And because you have several pictures of the church.
Yeah,
All right.
and I'll take you on a journey.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to
But
pick up from
is
her
that on
there.
your website?
I'm sorry,
Is that on your website?
Yeah.
it's on my Instagram for
Oh,
right now.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'll be posting more images when I go back because it's time for me to really get in there. I need to make some more quotes. So I'll take you on that journey.
We had a question?
I'm just curious how you make the faces on these clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, because they are so, I missed the first part of the one.
Yeah.
Covered that, I'm sorry. You know, it strikes me that the black girl with the white doll,
Yeah,
you know, she's looking with her eyebrows raised, her eyebrows raised. Like,
Yeah.
there's something, you know, we know about studies of white dolls, black children. that
yes,
kind of thing. So
yes,
I see all of that in the picture, and the face looks like I know all this.
yes. Well, you know, I was going through another change when I created my series of dolls. And I started thinking about how did I get into art in the first place? And as my sister Carolyn was saying, you know, my parents would buy us those big crayon boxes with all the different colors and the sharpener in the back. It kind of
Yes.
started like that for me, but I also spent a lot of time with my dolls. So even my most tattered dolls were very precious to me. But my faces that you're inquiring about, they're all done in graphite pencil. And I base them off of vintage photographs from my family, the black and white photographs, and also I use live models. But my portraits are never about getting the exact image of the person. It's more about the essence of the person that I am creating and how it takes me through this journey and other images of personalities begin to emerge. But I do start on canvas and with layering of graphite and spraying it with a workable fixative. I learned that was something my professors taught us to do, to layer, spray, layer, okay? So I'm layering and spraying at least maybe 8 times before I put on a final fixative. And that is why you can handle those quilts. My quilts are pretty tough. And they never lose that expression of the values and the tones.
And that, the canvas for
Thank you. That's myself. I put myself in a lot of my portraits as well.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but what have you learned from Carolyn? And how has she changed your art?
Well, okay, we are both teachers, right? And I'm the kind of teacher that would stay and might be the first one before the principal in my classroom. And the last to leave. And Carolyn would always come over and stay in the classroom with me. So I would do a lot of my work sometimes after school, 6 o'clock. We'd be there till nighttime, till the janitors kicked us out. But I learned that from her. She was the exact same way. And when I first came out of school, she talked her principal into hiring me as the art teacher there. So then we worked on our national boards. If we have any teachers here, they know how rigorous the national board is. And we've done ours 2 times. We used to write grants all the time for our students, but loved teaching. So I would say a discipline and the love of teaching through my art.
But she also mentioned that she's your fiercest critic.
Yeah.
Not just for the, is it just for the Uppity series that,
Yeah.
that she's the model for? Or is it for your work in general? And has it somehow changed, has her input changed your perspective?
Yes, it does. I mean, she will look at it from a different viewpoint. And at first I used to fight her and say, well, you know nothing about art, you know? But I learned that her natural eye, not having an investment in it, might help me to understand, well, don't put that hand up so high, maybe put it low. Can you put a little bit more expression in her face? Or, you know, can you put this out? I kind of learned some of that from her. But yeah, it can't come across as criticism. But I did learn to, you know, kind of accept that and say, okay, if you're seeing it that way, others will see it that way, and I can make that adjustment.
It was like a flash in time.
But yeah, it was a big thing when she threw me out of that garage because we didn't speak for about a month. That was a long time.
That was a week, right?
Yeah.
See, you know, the interesting thing about, you know, following spirit, right, is that doors have to close to get you where you're supposed to go.
Absolutely.
And you say that all the
You
time.
did the tough thing so she could get to, the ancestors are like,
I really believe that.
close your heart, pick your sister
Yeah,
out.
I believe that was really a tough time for us, but it did help me come out on another side. It got me into the church. It made me open up to some other people around me instead of just depending on my sister and that relationship that we had that was super close. And it also let me know, I told her she's going into a nursing home with me.
Funny enough, with Flash of the Spirit, when I was in Savannah, I went to, I think it's First Avenue. It's First Avenue. No. What's it called? It's one of the oldest churches, oldest of our churches, and in the basement, you know, they have the holes in the floor, right? And so this imagery in the cross pattern, this imagery would get overlooked because, you know, Africans, as they came over, they would continue to draw this on the floors of their homes or whatever. And so, but they were breathing holes also. So you can go into some of those churches and the slats come up because that's where they would hide people who were running away. And so this idea of the spiritual with the practical, right? Literally, you're able to breathe. And the reason why it doesn't cause attention is because they discard it as some pagan thing that you do, some heathen thing that you do from Africa.
Right.
But it was actually, you know, a part of the underground world.
Yes, absolutely.
And that was highlighted in Flash of the Spirit because that pattern would be drawn. And the idea of the spirit, that sudden moment of revelation, of a message coming through clearly, is very connected to
Yes.
how you're saying
Absolutely.
that your people are picking.
Yeah, so, yeah, I am, looking forward to actually working in the church and seeing what, new pieces I'll create while I'm there. I have in mind some pieces I know I wanna start with, but where it will lead me, that's where the adventure comes in. Yeah.
That's the duality.
Yes. The duality. That was my thesis when I was in graduate school.
That's really, really intriguing, and I
Yes.
think it maybe informs Roni's work as well.
I mean, I'm blown away. I'm the baby of the family. I'm like, my grandmother is my muse for, you know, where
But
my
the
message comes from.
idea of freedom and restraint.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
You know, with, you know, the freedom of an artist, but the listening to
Spirits.
ancestors and
Yes,
spirits
absolutely.
to, you know, get it right,
Yeah.
get it right, Beverly,
Yes,
get it right.
yes.
What do they say? It's not reduce. I'm thinking about the idea of when, it's a part of the prayer. It's a part of one of those moments where they say, decrease so that you might increase.
Yeah.
Basically that your personality and all the trappings of
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
fade so that God can speak, right? Or so that we can be a vessel
Right.
in a moment. And so, you know, definitely the formal aspect of making work
Yes,
forces the restraint, I think,
yes,
right? Because it's technical, it's math,
Right.
you know, right?
yes,
And then when you lay that basic, I think that gives range for the positive spirits, the
Yes.
enlightened spirits too.
Yeah. I think artists are kind of always dealing with that duality.
But do you think the restraint is more from technical aspects or the material aspects or the spiritual guiding aspects?
You know, for me, when I was in graduate school, that restraint had to do with the technical aspect of the formal aspects of creating art, right? And a little of that restraint, that was from my professors. A little of that restraint came from myself too, in that I want to respect my Southern culture, my ancestors, and as I'm recreating. But I still want that freedom to be able to, that's why I created in the first place. So I can step out of my reality and go into my other world. So that a lot of that duality and that restraint, that's what I was doing. But a lot of it had to do with the formal aspects of the creation of art.
And it would be the same for me as well. I mean, I'm most free in the writing phase. Well, actually, no, I'm most free probably in the dreaming phase. And so that's that sketching phase, when you're just seeing, you're witnessing.
Right.
But through the formal application, right, showing up and knowing your craft,
Yeah.
something else happens.
Yes.
It's an old film I made. It was a series called God and Man, and I documented 9 men in there and how they related to spirit. And in one of them, I had a figure pouring water onto a man's head, and then she draped him in white gauze, and he, at the end, you know, I direct him to say, okay, I want you to reach and pull back the veil and emerge, right? Okay, that's all okay, this is what you do, right? My camera's here, this is happening. But then the wind starts in, right? That's not something I can say, okay, wind, do the wind.
Yes, yes.
No, we're just here. We've done the formal things to make space for spirit. Sometimes people think, I even think about the Holy Ghost, right? This idea of the Holy Ghost. There's space made for the Holy Ghost. The music, right, sets the tone, opens the heart, and then as the rhythms become more fast or the rhythms go a certain way, that organ, it makes space for it. So the formal, I think sometimes the separation of those things, that's to me where it becomes unnatural. I think that spirit is infused in all of our daily doings, right? So the formal to me makes space for, makes space for spirit to be able to say, okay, you happen to be here when I spoke up. This man is birthing himself. Right. He's having a rebirth, and the wind is witness. And that's an aspect I could not have foresaw that it would happen in that moment. But it gives me life when I see it. I take a deep breath, and though we didn't use the sound from that footage, and when I'm editing, I hear us gasping. And I even think I said, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Roni, was it always like that in your artistic career?
For me?
In the early starting out, did you resent this intrusion of wait a minute, this isn't what I planned or what I
I came
in
to art
terms
through
of,
spirit.
and
So
then, okay.
I came to art through spirit. My mother was a painter, and an introvert, an avid reader. So a lot of her expression would, painting is very formal, very solo act, right? So I did not get to know my mother in certain ways. And when she died, I was 19. And so I just began a quest to connect with her in a new way. And so I started to have dreams, very vivid dreams about her life, things that she did not tell me. And so I was like, well, I was going through a divorce. I was living in her room at my grandmother's house in Ohio. And I started reaching out to family members who were with her, moving around back in the day. Like, do you remember Stubby Guy? My mom, somebody pull a gun on my mom, like, random things, a colored dress or something. And they would be like, girl, I know your mama didn't tell you that, and they were ready to talk. And so I became a filmmaker to tell my mother's story, and my mother revealed herself to me as a woman when I was able to see her as a human and not this archetypal mother figure that we think is infallible. And so I came to art literally to tell her story. So I have never resented. It's a blessing when spirit shows up, because that's what it's for. It's prayer. We are literally, asking to see clearly, asking, order my steps, those type of things. Like, we are asking to know how to navigate in this world.
Well, it's good
For me as an artist.
that, because young artists starting out now, it's good to maybe to know that, just accept the spirit early on if it's speaking to you, instead of saying, get out of the way, I've got my vision, and
But where does your vision come from?
No.
That's what I'm saying. Where does the vision come from?
But I think that young people probably think that their vision comes from they may not appreciate the influences or the input of spirits, and they come to it gradually, whereas you are immersed in it, I think.
Well, I think it's the weird things, verbiage, right? It's like the words, because your DNA is literally coded ancestry. Right. You are the sum of all those people. So it's not an intrusion. It's just like your own blood speaking. And so if you think it comes from you, yes, it does. But it's not you in this moment, in this iteration. It is all of that has come together to make you. And so, we could say it doesn't come from anywhere.
I know, but young people, whether they're artists or they're just, hit their heads against, you know, they might not accept that immediately.
Yeah, I think it does have something to do with maturity and experience. As an art educator, my students were learning a lot of formal approaches to art. And then I had some students that would come to me just natural artists. But I still had to like mold them to the formal aspects without having them lose that natural thing. I would always encourage them to try to still hold on to that, what makes them create art in the first place. But it was very important for me as their instructor that they follow some of the formal aspects of the art process. Knowing that in time with experience, where they would travel, where they would go, people that they would meet, would kind of influence their artworks.
Yeah.
And they have to kind of come to that understanding.
Yeah, it's personal, I think. I think it's personal, right?
It's very personal.
Both
And
my brothers are
sometimes they
artists.
can take it personal too. Like, they can get really upset when you try to get them to go from what they've always done, scribbling in their books, to the formal.
I'm pretty resistant too. I'm still resistant in some ways. I'm like, I wanna break that rule. I wanna break that rule. You know, I just wanna resist right here. And I don't care. I need to resist right
That's why
there.
those critiques are really hard. Yes.
All
That's criticism, I say critiquing.
right, anybody else? Anything else? I feel so edified.
Well, this was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you
really
so
appreciate
much.
it. I guess then, yeah.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. If you haven't helped yourself, just a bag of work for us.